Joining me now for more on today's meeting and what it could mean for the future of U.S. relations, not just with Russia, but with countries and European allies abroad, is Jamil Jaffer. He's the founder and executive director of the National Security Institute at the Antonin Scalia Law School at George Mason University. Jamil, good morning. You know, we heard so many times during the Biden administration, nothing about us without us, meaning nothing about Ukraine, nothing about potential negotiations between Russia and Kyiv without Ukrainians having a seat at the table. This is obviously a pretty remarkable departure from that. What has your reaction been?
Well, Andrew, obviously, the U.S. and Russia are the two biggest players in this fight, with the exception, of course, of Ukraine itself, which was invaded. And so the question really is, can the U.S. and Russia find a framework to begin the discussions around bringing Ukraine in, bringing Europe in? There's no question that Ukraine and Europe have to be part of this conversation. But if the U.S. and Russia can find a path forward, it might be a productive way to get to the end of this conflict sooner.
Yeah, and, you know, that's an interesting point because obviously, you know, the Ukrainians were not happy about this. We talked about Europeans not being happy about this. But is this sort of, we've been through this for 3 years now, almost a 3-year anniversary. We've been in a logjam. So do you view this as a potentially productive step in terms of breaking through that logjam, maybe go and speak with Russian counterparts, take that, go speak with Ukrainians, bring everyone together at some point? Does this make sense to you from a negotiating standpoint?
Well, look, the real question is, Andrew, we'll find out, right? Because we'll see if, in fact, this achieves any sort of sustainable peace. The challenge, of course, is for the Ukrainians to get what they need, which is some of their territory back. The idea that Russia is going to keep any of the territory post the invasion in 2022 is hugely problematic. The fact of the matter is that Russia illegally invaded Ukraine back in 2014 as well, and still is going to talk about giving up Crimea. So the question is, can the Trump administration extract some real concessions out of Russia? If not, then this methodology is not a successful one. But if they do, then I think everyone can come to the table and have a real conversation about how to end this conflict.
Yeah. And on that point, how important is not just when this ends, but how it ends? Meaning some of these major sort of negotiating talking points, joining NATO, borders, whether it's pre-2014 or pre-invasion in 2022, how important will how the negotiating process be towards how this ends and what it could potentially mean for the future of peace, but not only in Europe, but abroad?
Well, look, Russia is an untrustworthy negotiator. We've seen president after president. President Bush said famously that he saw into Vladimir Putin's soul. We had President Obama say to Vladimir Putin in a side what he thought was off mic, saying, hey, look, give me some more time after the election. We can work together. And now you have President Trump seeing if he can work together with Vladimir Putin. But the reality is, if you give him any ground, if you let him take any land post-2022, you let him know that Crimea is his forever, he's going to continue to make efforts forward. So the U.S. position has to be strong. They have to say, look, your aggression cannot be rewarded. This is not acceptable. And if you don't come to the table and make a fair negotiation, we're going to double down on the Ukrainians. DJ Roosevelt, I made this argument in an op-ed published in The Hill last week. We'll see if that's the position the Trump administration takes. I think a lot of people are concerned it won't be, but I'm not opposed to bilateral negotiations if, in fact, these are strong, forward-leading negotiations.
You know, we mentioned, obviously, the Europeans feeling left out here. What do you think this means in terms of the U.S. relationship with the European Union? Not only these Ukrainian negotiations going on right now in Saudi Arabia, but also what we saw at the Munich Security Conference last week with that speech where J.D. Vance was sort of lecturing some of the European leaders. What have you made about the U.S.-European relationship in the first couple weeks of Trump's administration?
Well, you know, I was in Munich last week, Andrew, at the conference, and we can tell you outside the weather was gloomy. It was a little snowy, and inside the weather was pretty gloomy as well, the mood, that is. And because, in part, I think the Europeans are concerned that the U.S. will not be there as an ally for them, will not back their efforts in Ukraine. But the truth is, they should have known this coming in. President Trump made that fairly clear along the way during the campaign. And so the question now for the Europeans is, will they step up? Will they be able to fill the role the U.S. has played thus far in the Ukraine conflict? And if not, within Europe, who's going to step up and lead? And how is the NATO alliance going to work in a scenario where the U.S. is demanding more from our European allies? And are the Europeans ready to step up and offer that more effort?
You know, last one for you here. we've also seen reports, and I think administration officials have talked openly about this idea that Ukraine should have some sort of, whether it's these rare earth minerals, essentially some sort of either payback for U.S. aid in the past or going forward. Is there any precedent for that, and is that an effective negotiating tactic that is rooted in some sort of historical precedent?
Well, look, there's a lot of precedent in history for those who are the aggressors in war to pay a price. You may remember famously the case of Weimar Germany after World War II being imposed significant reparations, which ultimately led to the rise of the Nazis and World War II. And so there is a history of the aggressors. In this case, of course, the aggressor nation is Russia. If anybody should pay for the cost of U.S. weapons to Ukraine, for the cost of rebuilding Ukraine, it's Russia. They began this war. They began the aggression. And frankly, that should be part of the negotiations, not pressure on Ukraine, but pressure on Russia.
Yeah. Jamil Jaffer, he's the founder and executive director of the National Security Institute. Jamil, thank you for joining us this morning.